So this evening, I would like to welcome you to another Minnesota Archaeological Society online lecture. We are really thrilled to be able to bring this series to you, a series of online lectures just to make archaeological information in Minnesota a little bit more widely available to everyone. All right, so this evening, we are really excited to have a presentation from Mike Michlovic, who is Professor Emeritus at Minnesota State University Moorhead. Mike conducted his fieldwork in the Red River and Cheyenne River valleys of western Minnesota and eastern North Dakota from 1976 to 2013. He is past president of the Council for Minnesota Archaeology, former editor of the Minnesota Archaeologist, past member of the Minnesota Review Board for the National Register, and currently serves on the board of the Minnesota Archaeological Society.
Thank you, Mandy. First of all, I have been organizing these Zoom lectures over the past couple of years, and I just want to take a moment to thank all of the previous speakers. I realize that these are presented gratis, and we have little to offer our speakers except our thanks. And I wanted to take this chance to let you all know how much the Minnesota Archaeological Society appreciated those of you who've given Zoom lectures before. I thought it was probably time that I did one myself, since I was asking everybody else to take part in these. Also, I want to thank Mandy Wintheiser. She's been a wonderful host for us for every one of these lectures. She's taken care to set them up and to introduce them and to manage them. And thank you very much, Mandy, for all the work you've put into taking care of this lecture series. Well, the title for tonight's presentation is Forgotten Prairie Culture. And in case any of you are wondering what I'm talking about, the archaeological culture or entity that I'm discussing is the Northeastern Plains Village Complex. We archaeologists on the plains have known about this for decades already, and there have been numerous excavations into the Northeastern Plains sites. But as I read the historical literature, I find that certain stereotypes continue to be offered by historians who have completely neglected a lot of the archaeological work that's gone on over the last 40 or 50 years. That's why on my title page here, I took a quote from the 19th century German historian Johann Droysen. His outline of the principles of history. Back then, he recognized the importance of monuments and artifacts and archaeological remains for bolstering the historical record and providing us with information about the past that we don't get from the historical record. So tonight I'm talking about the Northeastern Plains, and as you can see on this map, it extends from northwestern Iowa through western Minnesota, the eastern Dakotas, and into southern Manitoba. In 1961, Waldo Wedel referred to this area in his overview of plains archaeology, his book titled Prehistoric Man on the Great Plains. He referred to this area as the Northeastern Periphery because Wedel felt that this region was not truly part of the plains culture. And in this, he followed Otis Mason and Clark Whistler and Alfred Kroeber and other anthropologists who looked at the plains culture area and focused on what they referred to as the true plains peoples. The peoples west of the Missouri, the horse riding, bison hunting nomads, the Blackfeet, the Teton, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Kiowa. Those were the true plains people. The people in the Northeastern Plains, or what Wedel called the Northeastern Periphery, they were often farming peoples, and or they were peripatetic hunters and gatherers who he felt, like the cultural anthropologists, were not truly part of the plains culture. So he called it the Northeastern Periphery, and it was one of the conceptions that was popular for many years among Plains archaeologists. Another notion that dominated thinking about the Northeastern Plains is reflected in this map from Alfred Kroeber's 1939 volume, Cultural and Natural Areas of North America. Here, Kroeber shows in the dark black line you can see here, the area where maize farming is highly reliable. This was the 120-day frost-free season, I believe. And then you see a dotted line there that extends up into into western North Dakota. This is the 100-day frost-free line where maize agriculture or farming was precarious. Well, notice the Northeastern Plains, except for northwestern Iowa, is pretty much left out of it, maybe southern Minnesota as well. But up to about Big Stone Lake, farming was considered unlikely to be found. And those of us working on the Northeastern Plains found, of course, that that was not true, as I'll show you in a few minutes. Another one of the stereotypes about the Northeastern Periphery or the Northeastern Plains was that it was a place where people came to bury the dead. Eldon Johnson in '73 published the Arvilla Complex, reviewing mostly Lloyd Wilford's work along the beach ridges of Lake Agassiz and down in the Traverse Big Stone area. And in 1979, you can see on the right a map from Lee Sims' 1979 publication in Plains Anthropologist showing the distribution of the mounds of the Devil's Lake Surisford complex. So one of the notions about the Northeastern Plains was that it was rich in burial mounds, and in fact, a lot of archaeological research focused on these burial mounds. After the 1970s, of course, excavation into the mound ceased, but there was a good deal of information that had already been excavated by people like Wilford and Henry Montgomery much earlier than that, back in the early 20th century. And Lee Sims put a lot of that information together and defined another burial complex, the Devil's Lake Surisford burial complex, which he believed dated to the late prehistoric or pre-contact period, and showed some Mississippian influences. And he thought that it was the burial behavior of probably Siouan-speaking peoples who were bison hunters who moved onto the plains during the warm season and back into the aspen parkland on the periphery of the plains in the harsh seasons of the plains winters. And of course, there are a lot of burial mounds on the Northeastern Plains. This is an aerial photograph that I took back in the early 90s, I believe. And these are the Okiden Buttes on the southern Cheyenne River. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but there's a circular enclosure here. One of these, you can see an embankment outside of the ditch. There's a set of three conical burial mounds near the site, and you can see some linear embankments. These are very common on Northeastern Plains cemetery sites, these embankments coming out from the mounds. If you look a little further afield in a plowed area here, there's a solitary mound. And in the distance, there are a number of mounds that are part of what were known as the Rains Mound Group. T.H. Lewis mapped these in the late 19th century. And this photograph, which was taken, as I say, in the early 90s, still shows these mounds, although when George Hawley and I were out here in around 2010, I think, 2012, I can't remember the exact date, I could barely make out any of those mounds there. So this is an agricultural field, and the mounds are being, they're being plowed away, I guess, slowly but surely. But burial mounds are found along the Cheyenne River, the Red River Valley, and these mounds are on the James River, south of Jamestown, you'll see two complexes here. This complex that I'm highlighting here, this was originally referred to informally as Sodhenge, but you can see a couple of conical mounds, and they are linked and by ridges, and some of these ridges extend out from the central mound. About a half mile away, there's another complex of mounds that you can see here. A different arrangement, but the same idea, conical mounds linked together with these ridges. I don't know anybody who's offered an adequate explanation for what these arrangements might reflect or might mean, but they are fairly common. This is one of the reasons, or here are several reasons I chose the title for this topic. These are some quotes from historians in relatively recent history books about the Great Plains. Hines and Farragher refer to the Cheyenne people moving from their homeland in present-day Minnesota and heading west. Colin Calloway in One Vast Winter Count refers to the Cheyenne. Like the Cheyenne, the Sioux also moved west to take advantage of new opportunities. The initial stages of the move seem to have occurred in the 17th century. The idea here, repeated over and over again in our history books, is that people moved through the Northeastern Plains on their way to a new life in the plains in the Great Plains of the West, pushed westward by the European invasion. Most recently, in 2019, in his book on the Lakota, Pekka Hämäläinen tells us that in the middle years of the 17th century, the Lakotas had been an obscure tribe of hunters and gatherers at the edge of a bustling new world of Native Americans and European colonists that emerged in the eastern woodlands of North America. No guns, no metal weapons. They carried little political clout, a crisis that set off what may be the most improbable expansion in American history. Lakotas left their ancient homelands and reinvented themselves as horse people in the continental grasslands. Of course, Hämäläinen is saying, once again, that this was a historical event, that all of these movements through the Northeastern Plains by people who lived in the woodlands occurred mostly in the 17th century, perhaps a little bit earlier. Here's a map showing the Cheyenne moving from Minnesota up the Minnesota River Valley to the Cheyenne Valley and then out to the plains. The Dakota moving in the same direction, Hidatsa, Assiniboine, and so forth. All of these people moving under pressure from Europeans to their homelands on the Western Plains. But what I would like to talk about tonight are the archaeological remains of this entire Northeastern Plains area, which seem to be entirely neglected in this migrationist scenario. One of the most famous sites, maybe the most famous site on the Northeastern Plains, is the Biesterfeldt site. This is on the Cheyenne River in North Dakota. It's on the very southern arm of the Cheyenne River in southeastern North Dakota. It's sometimes been referred to as the Cheyenne site. Cheyenne with a C for the people and Cheyenne with an S for the river. And this site was mapped by William Clark in 1806 or thereabouts, around that time, after he returned from the expedition, the Lewis and Clark expedition. It was first mentioned by David Thompson, a explorer and cartographer who met a Chippewa man at Red Lake, I believe. His name was Shea Pasquet. And he said that in 1799, he told Thompson that when he was a young man, he and his fellow warriors attacked a Cheyenne village on the Cheyenne River and drove the Cheyenne people west and burned their village down. So this is the site on the Cheyenne River that the Cheyenne people presumably lived at in the 18th century. This this account by David Thompson in 1799, well, he calculated that Sheshepashkut was an old man, and if he was a young man when this attack occurred, that maybe the Cheyenne left here sometime, let's say around 1750. So the popular idea, and one that was promoted by George Bird Grinnell in his great history of the Cheyenne people, was that the Cheyenne, being Algonquian speakers, must have had their homeland at some point around the Great Lakes area or in Minnesota, nearby where other Algonquian speaking peoples lived. And, they moved out of the woodlands up to the Cheyenne river valley under pressure, presumably from Europeans, where they settled and had an agricultural village. And after they were pushed out by the Chippewa, they moved west, adopted the horse and the gun and bison hunting and the nomadic lifestyle of the Great Plains Indians. Here you see the Biesterfeldt site. I took this picture I guess around 1990 or so. Notice that half of the site is demolished or been plowed over. So only half of the site remains. You can see the earth lodge depressions there, and you can see the fortification ditch or the remnants of it. The site originally had about 65 lodges, and in 1938, William Duncan Strong excavated at the Biesterfeldt site, and I think he dug all or parts of about 10 of these lodges, and he was impressed with the fact that these were farming people, and they had just moved out of Minnesota and were headed to a brand new life on the Great Plains. Well, here is a drawing. Now, Duncan Strong never fully published the Biesterfeldt site. He did review his findings in a 1940 article, but it wasn't until Ray Wood, when he was at the Smithsonian Institution, took the collection and wrote up the monograph on the Biesterfeldt site. This is one of the houses that Strong excavated. If any of you are familiar with Minnesota archaeology, you probably realize that we don't have many earth lodge depressions and features of this sort in Minnesota archaeology. This looks like the kind of lodge that you would find among the village peoples who lived along the Missouri River, the Hidatsa, the Mandan, the Arikara. Here's some pottery from the Biesterfeldt site. And you can see some of it has impressions or stampings on it. And Strong talked to Wilford, apparently, and they decided that this looked vaguely like Minnesota woodland pottery, perhaps a little bit like black duck or something like that. And so maybe it could be affiliated with Minnesota, and make the idea of these people who lived at this site coming out of Minnesota a little more comfortable to live with. But really, the pottery looks more like the kind of pottery you'd find in the Missouri Valley, just as the houses do. If I could go back to this picture, I just wanted to mention to you, I have to tell you this story. I used to take my students down to the Biesterfeldt site when I was teaching at Moorhead, and we'd take a tour of the Cheyenne Valley and the Maple River Valley and look at some of these little sites. And Biesterfeldt was the biggest site we had to visit. The problem was the landowner was a man named Erwin Johnson. He was one of these bachelor Norwegian farmers, and Erwin didn't have a telephone, and so if I wanted to get permission to go down and visit the site, I couldn't call him, and it was an 80-mile drive from Moorhead. So I didn't want to drive down and knock on his door. So I would call his neighbor, a guy named Charles Rotenberger, and Charles told me, look, if you want to come and see the site, give me a call, and I'll drive over, and it's only a couple miles. I'll ask Erwin if you can come down, and then I'll get back to you. So I would do that, and I'd get permission to come down and visit the site that way. And Erwin would sit on a fence post. He never said a word to any of us. He'd just watch us while my students and I walked around the site. But anyway, years later, it must have been around 2005 or so, I got an email from a Cheyenne, a grandfather who wanted to bring his grandkids from Montana. He wanted to come out and see the ancestral home of the Cheyenne people. And so he had called the Historical Society in Bismarck to get permission to go to the site. And they said, well, we can't give you permission. It's on private property. But Mike Michlovic goes down there and visits the site. So why don't you contact him? Maybe he can help you. So this man emailed me and asked me if I could get permission for him to visit the site. So I emailed him back and I said, sure, I'll call my friend down there and ask him to, let him know that you want to come out. So I called Charles, and he said, he said, Mike, you haven't heard, Erwin Johnson died 3 days ago. And I said, well, what happened? He was like 88 years old, and he was driving his tractor, and it rolled over in a ditch, and he was killed. So I asked about Erwin and how he had died, and then I asked Charles. I said, do you know who's inheriting, or who's the property belong to now? And he said, well, Erwin didn't have any relatives, so it's going up for public auction. Oh, well, so I thought, maybe we should do something. And I knew that the Archaeological Conservancy, that Arizona group, I knew that they would purchase properties of, important sites. And but I was a Minnesotan, so I thought I can't interfere myself with North Dakota property. So I called the Historical Society, and luckily Fern Swenson in Bismarck took over, and she contacted Paul Gardner for the Archaeological Conservancy. Paul came up, put in a bid, bought the property and several dozen acres around there. And it's a good thing he did, because after the property was purchased, George Hawley and Renita Dalen at Moorhead State and myself, we were asked by the Park Service to go out and do a little bit of testing at Biesterfeldt, because the Park Service wanted to put this up for a national landmark status. It was already on the National Register, so they wanted to make it a historic landmark, and we did a little bit of work out there. George Hawley headed up the research, and while we were out there, the farmer who owns the land just to the south there, he came over to me, and he was really upset that some outsider bought this land, and he said, we're farming here and we're trying to make a living. Like he was I just pointed to the fields all around. I said, look, everywhere you can see, there's farmland. I said, this tiny, that what you're looking at there is 5 or 10 acres. I don't know. I said, this is all we want for, to save this site. And it was an important site. So I'm pretty sure if that Cheyenne man had not wanted to bring his grandkids out here, this land would have passed to that farmer, and the Biesterfeldt site would be gone right now. Another interesting site on the Northeastern Plains is the Hint site. This was dug in the 1950s by Richard Wheeler. The city of Jamestown, they were building a dam on the James River in Jamestown. This is about 100 miles west of Fargo. And he excavated a number of sites, including the Hint site. Here again, you see one of these earth lodge sites or structures. And notice the pottery that I have illustrated here. S-shaped rims, Middle Missouri type decorations. Some of the pottery is very unusual for the Missouri Valley. This vessel you see down below actually has what looked like almost Oneota decorations on it. So we see here something very different, and it's different from Biesterfeldt too. This site has a combination of pottery, some of which looks like Middle Missouri pottery, and some of it look unusual. Wheeler called it the Stutzman focus, and it was a combination of ceramic materials that looked like somewhat the majority of it looked like Middle Missouri pottery. A minority of it looked like something from farther to the east. And this pottery, he named or classified into several different types: Lisbon ware, Owego ware, and Buchanan ware. And it was mainly Lisbon ware looked like a little bit like woodland pottery, cord marked bodies. Buchanan had more smooth bodies. There were decorations were notching and trailed lines or incising. So this looked a little bit more, well, Eastern-like, and some of it even a little bit like Oneota. So the Stutzman focus was the beginning of what we now call, it was the beginning of a recognition of something that we now call Northeastern Plains Village Complex. I got directly involved in this after I heard a paper by Fred Schneider at the Plains Conference in 1977. Fred identified a number of fortified sites in eastern North Dakota. These were the days when we had slide projectors, and if you wanted to be fancy, you could do something like a reverse negative or something, and your slide turned out to be black with white print on it instead of the other way around. Pretty impressive. Anyway, you can see the number of sites that Fred has identified in southeastern North Dakota. One of them is up at near Devil's Lake on the northern part of the Cheyenne River. Most of them are in the southern Cheyenne Valley and James Valley in North Dakota. Here's a Google Earth map of Fargo on one side, Fargo, Moorhead, Jamestown on the other. And most of these sites that make up what I think of as the Northeastern Plains Village Complex are located to the south of those cities. Hendrickson 3 is on the James River. Peterson, Nelson, Lucas, they're on the Cheyenne River. Biesterfeldt is too, but Biesterfeldt is definitely not Northeastern Plains Village Complex. Biesterfeldt is affiliated with the Missouri Valley. And there is a tributary to the Maple River, and that is, or to the Cheyenne River. It's called the Maple River, and that's where the Shea and Sprunk site are. I'll be speaking about those in a minute. Down by the lakes, Lake Traverse and Big Stone Lake, there are a number of other of these small village sites: Shady Dell, Tenney, Bunker Hill, and Hartford Beach. This is the Hendrickson 3 site. I'm using a LiDAR map that the North Dakota Geological Survey provides. Hendrickson 3 is this small enclosure just above the James River. And notice on the bluffs behind it, there are a series of mounds with linear embankments again. This is a ditch enclosed site with 5 depressions. Most of what they found there, of course, and as is true of many of these sites, most of what's found are bison bone. There is maize found in flotation samples, and Ceramics include Buchanan, Lisbon, and Owego wares. In other words, the same type of pottery that was found at the Hint site. Radiocarbon dates here are about 1400. This is a calibrated date. By the way, the Hint site to the north of Hendrickson on the James is dated to the early 17th century, in other words, to the 1600s. And Richard Wheeler, when he excavated at Hintz, affiliated it with the Hidatsa and the painted woods focus on the Missouri River. Hendrickson 3 doesn't really have the look of that Middle Missouri pottery, that Hidatsa-like pottery with S rims, LeBeau ware, that sort of material. It is primarily this Northeastern Plains pottery types, Buchanan, Lisbon, Owego, and it is a couple of centuries earlier than the Hint site. So we have another manifestation of Northeastern Plains culture here at the Hendrickson 3 site. On the Cheyenne and Maple River, there are a number of sites. Peterson, Nelson are on the Cheyenne River, just above the town of Fort Ransom. And the Shea and Sprunk site are on the Maple River, to the east of Peterson and Nelson. All four of these sites are, I suspect, belong to the Northeastern Plains Village Complex. I've excavated at Shea, Sprunk, and Peterson. We were not able to get permission to enter the Nelson site, however. Here you can see the Shea site and the Sprunk site on the Maple River. They're located about 3 miles from each other. I should say that the cultural materials at these two sites are almost identical. I refer to them as sister sites. Shea is the larger of the two. They both date to the 15th century, to the 1400s. Here's a picture of the Maple River. This was taken in the early 2000s. I'll show you in a second a dam that was built on the Maple River. All of this is now destroyed. Whenever flooding occurs, the dam backs up water, and most of the woodlands here have been destroyed by floodwaters. Even though the dam is not a permanent dam, it's it's a temporary dam to hold back floodwaters to prevent flooding in the Fargo-Moorhead area. Here are the radiocarbon dates from these two sites. The average dates for the 5 Shea dates are around 1500. Sprunk is a little bit earlier. And here's a LiDAR image of the Maple River Dam and the Shea site. Here are the Shea site. Here's the fortification ditch. And you may be able to notice there's I think this is an image of the interior ditch at the Shea site, or a reflection of the interior ditch at the Shea site. The Shea site was expanded at least once, and we were fortunate to have 2 ditches at the site, because the ditches collected the garbage that people threw away, and so they were the places where we found most of the artifacts. Unfortunately, the dam, which became operative around 2006 or 7, no, I guess it was a little after that, maybe 2010. But anyway, this entire area in gray now is temporarily flooded, often during the spring melt. And the water comes up along the edge of the Shea site, and erosion is a problem. This is a picture, an aerial of the Shea site from 1987. You can see the fortification here. There's some cattle wandering around there. The landowner, Roger Shea, kept this site in pasture, and I asked him once why he never plowed this up. I don't know if you can see right in the corner of the picture over here. You can see his plowed field. He farms here. And I asked him, why didn't you ever farm this area? He said, well, we knew that my father and they owned the land for 100 years. They knew there was something there, and he didn't want to wreck it. I wish there was more of that, but you can see some erosion here, but most of this hillside was covered with a thick growth of leafy spurge, and there really wasn't a lot of active erosion on the site, except maybe a little bit around this side here. Now that the dam has been built, this is what the base of that hillside looks like with some of the floodwaters. The site it seems to me that it's endangered. The water board in the area doesn't agree with that, but you can see that there's been some serious impact to the base of the bluff where the Shea site sits. Here's a map that Fred Schneider prepared, and I have outlined in yellow the two ditches. A smaller ditch, I presume this was somewhat earlier, and then the site was expanded, although I guess it's possible that it was just the opposite. The site was once much larger, and then a smaller version of it was built. But the slightly earlier Sprunk site is a smaller site, and I'm of the impression that Shea was probably expanded over time. These two pictures show you the profiles of the excavations into the two ditches. This is a profile of the inner ditch, and you can see layers of artifacts and sterile layers in between. Ash deposits, bone. And if you take the inside ditch and the outside ditch and consider them both and count up the layers, you get an idea of how the site might have been occupied. Since this is a hilltop site, our impression is that people lived at these sites during the warm season, and in the winters, they probably moved into a more protected area. Sitting on a bluff top in North Dakota winter is, it's challenging. And we know that villagers along the Missouri River sometimes, made it down into the river, into the woods below their villages during the winter. During the spring, when the snow melts, you would have had some runoff into these ditches and perhaps some sterile sediment. So we think that the layers of artifacts may represent occupational periods, the sterile layers of sediment here, the cold season. And if you add them up, I would guess 10 or 15 years of occupation are reflected in the deposits of these two ditches. So this was sedentism. This was a place where people lived and spent time. They invested time in digging these ditches for protection. And by the way, we did find post molds interior to the larger exterior ditch. I mean, we found interior post molds that suggested there may have been a wooden palisade inside the ditch. It's pretty certain these were dug for the purpose of fortifying the settlement. But people lived here for some time. This was not a temporary habitation. This was not a seasonal occupation. This was something that people lived at for probably a decade or more. We did find evidence of farming. We found scapula hoe fragments, and here are corn cob and kernel fragments. And the ceramic assemblage was interesting. And I'll tell you something that is really fascinating to me. If you look at the Hendrickson 3 site, you saw that pottery, or I mentioned the pottery was Buchanan ware and Owego ware and Lisbon ware. Here at the Shea site, now we're about 70, 60 or 70 miles farther to the east. Here's Sandy Lake pottery. And we got about half the pottery at the site, at the Shea site, was good Sandy Lake pottery. This is a shell-tempered pottery that looks like it could have come right out of central Minnesota. But at the same time, we also found this Northeastern Plains pottery, this Northeastern Plains village pottery, often smooth surfaced, usually grit tempered, trailed line decoration, shallow punctations, some Oneota-like designs on them as well. And then, in fact, we found a couple of pieces of pretty good Oneota pottery at the Shea site. At the Sprunk site, the ditch didn't have as much debris, nor at the Sprunk site did we find evidence of such a intense or a lengthy occupation. But even so, year after year, these ditches filled in. This is a profile of one of our larger excavation areas at the Sprunk site. And I'd like to point something out about Northeastern Plains archaeology. There's a lot of rodent burrows. They are all over the place, and there's been a lot of disturbance from burrowing animals. But I've outlined here the layer where we found most of the artifacts. Of course, with gophers and other burrowing animals, some of the artifacts drift down and so forth, but most of the artifacts are here in this area. You see a little dip here, and there is a ash stain here. This is an old fire hearth, probably dug into the ground surface. But some of us working on the Northeastern Plains have been criticized for not exposing house structures. And I've tried looking for for post molds, and every time we'd find gopher holes, and so we'd dig them out and try to see if they were post molds, and we just never seemed to find a good pattern of post molds reflecting the outline of a house. But take a look at this this topsoil. This is a 70 centimeter profile here. About 55 centimeters of it is more or less a horizon. If the occupation floor is here, and you're putting posts into the ground, how deep are they going to penetrate? And what's the likelihood that they're going to leave any evidence in the brown subsoil? Not much. So I think one of the reasons we don't find many good indications of house shapes at a lot of these Northeastern Plains village sites is simply because these prairie soils are just too rich in organic material. Ceramic vessel from the Sprunk site. It looks like a Sandy Lake vessel, but the decoration is decidedly not Sandy Lake. It looks like a woodland, Minnesota, woodland area vessel, shape-wise. Decoration-wise, it doesn't. Here's some more ceramics from the Sprunk site. You might call a Sandy Lake vessel here, found in the same, literally almost next to a vessel like this. This looks like a combination of a Sandy Lake vessel with Northeastern Plains rim on it. Shell tempered, smooth surfaced on the rim, a nice well-defined neck. And this vessel looks like an Oneota vessel. Oneota decoration on it anyway. And it's at the Sprunk site. This is a little handle right here. To give you an idea of what the other remains are that we found at the site, this is the identifiable elements from different animals at the Sprunk site. Bison at the Sprunk site are predominant. They're predominant at the Shea site. They're predominant at the Hendrickson site. They're predominant at most of these sites. One of the most unusual of these Northeastern Plains sites is at Lockport, Manitoba. This is north of Winnipeg. Lockport was excavated by Richard McNeish in the 1950s. He found a stratified sequence there from the Archaic up through the late woodland. Later work at Lockport showed that there was a horticultural layer at the site. Bell-shaped pits, scapula hose, maize, ceramic vessels, very much like, in fact, identical to the kinds of materials we were finding at Sprunk, at Shea, and at other Northeastern Plains sites. Radiocarbon dates center around 1350. This is an agricultural site north of Winnipeg, belonging to the Northeastern Plains Village Complex. It's woodland material below, and it's Selkirk ceramics above. So it's sandwiched between two, what we would call woodland occupations. It looks like a site unit intrusion of Northeastern Plains people down the Red River to the vicinity of Lake Winnipeg around the middle of the 14th century. If we move down to the lakes country, to Lake Traverse and Big Stone Lake, there are a number of these small enclosures. Shady Dell, Tenney, Bunker Hill. Here's an aerial photograph from Google Earth taken in the winter, and this is the Shady Dell enclosure. The pottery here is from Shady Dell, and you'll notice something really peculiar. It doesn't look like the pottery from Shea, from Sprunk, from Lockport, from Hendrickson 3. It's very distinctive corded decoration, probably earlier in time than these other sites, but nevertheless. So all we have are photographs of some of the artifacts. They look like late or terminal woodland materials. Scott Anfinson classified these as part of the Big Stone phase, probably dates to maybe the 1200s. This site is on Big Stone Lake rather than Lake Traverse. By the way, these three sites here are all above Lake Traverse. This is the Hartford Beach site. You can see in this black and white, in this LiDAR photo, here's Hartford Beach enclosure, right above Big Stone Lake. Here's the ditch. Picture I took back, I don't know, about 15 years ago or so. This is part of a park, Hartford Beach Park. The dates average around 1300 AD. Some of the pottery there has been classified as Cambria. There are a variety of different ceramic forms, though, at Hartford Beach. But it, too, has been classified as part of the Northeastern Plains Village Complex. So to come to some conclusion now, Dennis Toom and Dale Henning have defined a Northeastern Plains village tradition with the evidence of sedentism and a dual economy of small-scale farming and hunting and gathering. Dennis Toom sees three phases to the Northeastern Plains villages: 12 to 1300, 13 to 16, and 16 to 18. And he sees the Northeastern Plains developing out of late Cambria and developing into the scattered village complex of the Missouri River Valley. There's a lot of ceramic variability, including Sandy Lake, Oneota, some Middle Missouri forms, and of course this distinctive Northeastern Plains village ceramics, the Owego ware, Buchanan ware, and Lisbon ware. A lot of people believe that the Devil's Lake Surrisford burial complex that Lee Sims defined is the burial complex of this Northeastern Plains culture. And it includes the Stutzman-focused sites from the 1600s that Richard Wheeler dug, but not Biesterfeldt. Biesterfeldt is different. I've been concerned more with the Shea phase of the Northeastern Plains villages. This dates from about 1450 to 1600. These are small upland sites. There are lowland sites in the river bottom floodplains, but these sites are not fortified. The Shea phase has maize and squash horticulture, no earth lodges. Sandy Lake and Northeastern Plains village wares with Oneota motifs common. And catlinite is present along with a lot of Knife River flint. I just drew this little Venn diagram to show you that it looks to me like what is happening with these Northeastern Plains materials. It's an overlapping of Sandy Lake and Oneota and this distinctive Northeastern Plains material with a little bit of Middle Missouri material as well. So it's a complicated set of late pre-contact materials. There are some fortified settlements and definite evidence of maize. While this was going on, larger villages were being established along the Missouri River. There is a routine mixture of ceramic styles in the Northeastern Plains village complex. And this dovetails with ethnographic descriptions of intergroup alliances that are described by Susan Sherrick and Patricia Albers for the ethnohistoric period. Guy Gibbon has suggested that during this period, the Sinomani or Sandy Lake peoples of central Minnesota were experiencing a tribalization, and the Northeastern Plains villages may be part of that process during the late prehistoric period. Well, that is my presentation in the Northeastern Plains Village Complex.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. That was a wonderful presentation. Very interesting. We definitely have a couple questions that have come in. The first one I've got is just wondering if you could pass on any book recommendations, especially geared towards maybe people who are just beginning their dive into archaeology that might connect to the topic you presented tonight.
You could check Guy Gibbon's book on the Sioux, in which he discusses the Sandy Lake developments in central Minnesota. George Hawley and I have written a book that is available online. It's called Archaeological Cultures of the Cheyenne Bend, and it deals with the Shea and Sprunk materials. But most of this is in the periodical literature. You can read articles in Plains Anthropologist. Dennis Toombs' article on the Northeastern Plains Village Complex is in the 2004 Plains Anthropologist. That is one of the standard articles that everybody looks at. And George Hawley and I review it in our book on the Cheyenne, the archaeological cultures of the Cheyenne Bend. But Plains Anthropologist is probably the place where you would find most of the material. Richard Wheeler wrote about the Stutzman-focused sites in the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology series. And of course, if you wanted to read about the Biesterfeldt site, Ray Wood's monograph is available. And that's through the Smithsonian Institution as well.
Excellent, thank you. Uh, let's see. Someone says, in a nutshell, how would you revise the popular narratives you quoted at the outset of your presentation this evening?
How would I revise it? Well, I think we need to recognize that the Northeastern Plains was a place that was occupied and used right up to the historical period. It was not simply a place that people passed through, nor was it a peripheral area that was simply used as a burial grounds. There was not only an occupation there, but it was in some sense an intensive occupation with farming villages that lasted for hundreds of years. So, so yeah, I would characterize it as as an area of very distinctive cultural developments. You know, you can see it's like maize farming is moving into the area. If you look at the southeastern part of the Northeastern Plains complex, you have woodland-like pottery. But by the time it gets to the central Red River Valley and into the James Valley, it looks like you have much later, some more village-looking pottery affiliated or associated with these sites. So it looks like farming is moving up into this region between the maybe the 13th to the 15th century.
I've got a sort of multi-part question next. Someone says, they're viewing from Manitoba. They say, can you say anything about Vickers' focus and how Mortlach fits into the Northeast Plains Valley Complex? And then also, do you think this is mostly ancestral Hidatsa Crow?
Well, I don't. I'm not sure how it would fit in with the Mortlach complex. And I don't think it's all Hidatsa. Now, Dennis Toom has argued in his 2004 article on the Northeastern Plains complex that is exactly what happened, that this turned into historic Hidatsa. But I just see Toom, from an Eastern point of view, that is a Minnesota point of view. This is heavily involved with Sandy Lake, and further to the south, it's involved with this corded ware ceramics, and the further west you get, the more you get some of this Middle Missouri type pottery that you would affiliate with, say, the Hidatsa. I wouldn't say that the Hidatsa were not involved. They may certainly well have been involved in some aspects of this Northeastern Plains village complex. I don't see this as something that belongs to a single ethnic group, but something that was perhaps participated in by a number of groups, ranging from people who lived north of modern-day Winnipeg to people who lived, down at Big Stone Lake, and other people who lived on the James Valley or the James River, and other people who lived in west central Minnesota. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but I think this is a phenomenon that's larger than a single ethnicity.
Thank you. Last question I have for the moment, unless any more come in. I guess the question is, do you have additional plans for future work along this lines? Or if you don't, what would be your sort of big dream plan for further research?
Well, I've been retired for a number of years. I have no academic affiliation or institutional affiliation, so I'm pretty much out of the picture. But there is so much to be done, and I don't know who is going to do it. These sites are, there are sites out there. Look at the Shea site. They built that dam only about a quarter of a mile, not even that far away from the Shea site. The Shea site is on a bluff top overlooking a dam site and it's eroding. And I don't know how long it will be there, whether it will start slumping or not. And the same is true. The Sprunk site is, along the same river and subject to the same kind of erosional features. There's so much to be done. And, the academic institutions are losing their archaeologists. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I, one school after another is just, seems to be abandoning archaeology. So it's up to cultural resource management archaeology to work at these sites. However, cultural resource managers and, these archaeologists aren't free to go wherever they want and dig. They have clients that they have to provide services for, and that's how they make their living. So I just don't know what will happen in the future. I am concerned. There's the Northeastern Plains. There's so much to be done there, and I'm just not sure who there is active these days to do it. I know that not only in Minnesota and North Dakota have archaeological programs been curtailed, but I suspect that the same may be happening in Manitoba. So throughout the region, we have a desperate need for more archaeology to be done, and not enough archaeologists to do it. Or maybe I should say, not enough archaeological programs to get the work done.
It's fair. Thank you. Follow up to our multi-part question from before. Would you consider Vickers focus the Northeast Plains part of this complex?
I'm glad someone asked that, because I was debating whether to include discussion of Vickers in this, but Bev Nicholson has found scapula hose, and I know that I think Boyd and others have found some starch granules indicating the use of maize, but I don't know if that's being traded in or if this is actually settled villages. And I guess I decided that I would not include the Vickers focus in this discussion, although I would certainly be open to the argument that the Vickers focus should be included into the Northeastern Plains Village Complex. But I think that's something that people who are more familiar with the Vickers focus might want to take into hand and decide whether or not this is something that should be done. But I'd certainly be open to accommodating the Vickers focus in Northeastern Plains Village Complex.
Excellent. And then one more follow-up with that one, sort of related to the first part of the question, but the knowledge that ancestral Arapaho and Atsinavin village folks, do you have any thoughts about that connected to this?
I have thought about that. I don't know how to approach it right now, but yes, the Arapaho have a tradition of, a past history in the Red River Valley, or the region around here, and they certainly could have been part of this whole business. I don't know who all was involved in terms of tribal identifications. I know that Dennis Toom has suggested a Hidatsa affiliation for much of the Northeastern Plains Village Complex, but the Sandy Lake pottery that we find so commonly in sites along the Maple River, that suggests to me, and by the way, along the Red River in Minnesota, on the Minnesota-North Dakota border as well, there is Sandy Lake pottery with some of this Buchanan ware, and it suggests that the people who made Sandy Lake pottery were part of this as well. So, and that would mean possibly Dakota. So Dakota, Hidatsa, Arapaho, yes, there's a lot of ceramic variability in this Northeastern Plains village complex. And that's why at the end of this presentation, I mentioned Susan Sharrock's work and Patricia Albers, because they suggested that there were multi-ethnic groups on the Northern Plains, and that we have to we have to consider this when we're trying to understand what went on in the later part of the prehistoric period, that these ethnic groups did not have rigid boundaries, but they overlapped one another. And that might explain some of the artifactual variability we find at some of these late prehistoric sites. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Arapaho somehow were involved with this Northeastern Plains complex.
Thank you so much for fielding all of these questions and for the presentation this evening.
Well, thank you.